Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Disability Rights, What Advocates Need to Know, presented by Kim Swain, hosted by NASW California DisAbilities Council. My name is Helene Diamond. I am the Council Chair for the DisAbilities Council. We are so excited to be all here with us today as we learn about how you better advocates for disability rights. I want to let you know that if you are interested in learning more about our council, interested maybe in getting involved, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can email us at NASW-CA disabilitiescouncil@gmail.com. The email is in the chat box. Before we get started, I want to encourage you all to use the chat box and use the emoji reactions so you can be more interactive during the presentation. If there's time at the end, we will have a Q&A. So also feel free to put any questions in the chat box and also use the Q&A function. So we're gonna get started now. Our council member, Victor J, will now introduce our esteemed presenter.
Which it is an honor and privilege to do, to welcome Kim Swain, who is a highly knowledgeable and experienced attorney who is specialized in disability civil rights for over 4 decades. She recently retired from her position at Senior Counsel with Disability Rights California, where she represented clients in both individual and class action cases under Section 504 ADA for housing law. She started her career at Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, also known as DREDF, and has taught disability rights classes at both UC Davis and Hastings Schools of Law. Kim focused her career on deinstitutionalization, fighting for better community-based services and independent housing for people with disabilities. Above all, Kim is a wonderful human being whom we're all really extremely excited to learn from today. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kim.
Thank you, Victor. I just want to thank the California DisAbilities Council for inviting me to speak here today. And I really have enjoyed meeting all of the individuals who work there, Helene and Cindy and Judy and Victor and Joseph, who all helped coordinate this, spell check my PowerPoint, and help to make it a smooth transition into a presentation. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to presentation. This is a really quick, next slide, thanks. I'm going to be covering a very quick overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and with touching upon Section 504 as well. A little bit about how advocates, what their role can be and how they can help in terms of advocating for clients or themselves in the area of disability rights. What's covered under the law? What are the obligations of providers and employers? What constitutes discrimination? What remedies are available to consumers? And what are some of the really great resources that are out there available to help? I actually teach a whole law school class on the ADA, and I have, I think, 40 minutes today. So it's going to be a very short overview with hopefully some time at the end for questions. But my real goal is to give you enough tools and information so that you can issue spot and you can find some of the wonderful resources, either legal agencies to help or written materials, websites. So if you have a concern or a problem or a question, you know where to go and how to frame that and how to get the answers that you need. Okay, next. I was also asked to do a very brief look at the criminal justice and emergency response systems, which are very kind of hot issues in the disability rights field. And I will do that in a very superficial way, but these are very important issues that affect all of our clients. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in that area. And hopefully as time permits, there'll be time for questions and answers. I would like to encourage people to put their questions in the chat box, and they'll be collected by the coordinator, and we'll try to prioritize some of those which seem to be the most comprehensive. I won't have time to answer people's individual questions about their personal legal problems. So I just would like people to ask questions that are more that are broader and that everyone on this presentation might like to be are interested in. Okay, next. So first of all, a little bit about advocates and how you can help as an advocate. There's lots to know, and as I said, you're not attorneys, but that doesn't mean that you can't know things about the law and can't be helpful to your clients or advocating for your friends or yourself. The best thing I think you can do is understand the limits and the power of people's legal rights and understand what resources and referrals there are out there to help people. You can also advocate for individuals to gain access to programs or to make requests for accommodations if you're comfortable doing that. You can link people to legal resources such as legal aid offices or disability right agencies or government agencies if they need to file a complaint or they have a question that involves, a legal question that they need assistance with. And at the bottom of this slide, I have a couple of really good resources. One is Law Help, which pretty much sorts all of the free legal agencies throughout the country, but the second one is in California too. So if you have a question about Social Security benefits or housing or disability civil rights, you can click on that website and find local resources in your county or in your area that could help your clients. The bottom one is the agency I used to work for, which is Disability Rights California. And they have extensive publications on things like regional centers, special education, benefits, civil rights issues. And I, would encourage people if they have questions about other legal issues to access those websites as well. Next. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the federal laws that really protect people with disabilities. I'm going to briefly mention Section 504 of the Rehab Act, which was passed in 1973, because it was kind of the precursor to the ADA. Section 504, and maybe a lot of you have heard about it, bans discrimination by programs or activities that receive federal funding. And it was the first real Civil Rights Act passed, kind of a switch from the medical model and the social model into the civil rights model. And maybe many of you who live in California are familiar with the sit-in in San Francisco, where the disability advocates and people with disabilities took over the federal building to really force the federal government to come out with regulations to make that law, to implement that law. Almost 20 years later, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and that bans discrimination by a whole bunch of broad other entities, state and local governments, businesses such as restaurants and hotels, and all employers who have over 15 employees. All of these were kind of based off of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protected other classes of individuals based on like race, sex, national origin, color. Disability rights is probably the last of those major categories, but this is really a recognition that disability is a civil rights category as well as other protected classes. Next. So I'm going to talk today about the three major sections of the ADA. The first one is Title I, which covers employment discrimination. The second one is Title II, which covers public entities or state and local governments and transportation. And Title III, which covers public accommodations or businesses. And we're going to revisit all three of these in much more detail. Next. I'm going to start off by what's not covered, because I think people have kind of a misunderstanding of what is covered by the ADA and what's not covered. But the first big area that's not covered is housing. So it doesn't mean that there aren't housing protections for people with disabilities, but housing law is covered under the Federal Fair Housing Act, and that bans discrimination in all aspects of housing, including mortgage lending, landlord-tenant relations, purchasing housing, etc. So I'm not going to be talking about that today. That would be another whole topic of conversation or training. The other area is the ADA doesn't cover religious entities, such as churches and synagogues. And the third area that's not covered by the ADA is airlines. That's covered under the Air Carrier Access Act and the Department of Transportation. So, you know, the ADA covers a lot of things, but those three things are not covered. Next. So I'm going to first talk about who's covered. What people who have disabilities are covered. And this slide just has pictures of just people's faces, an individual in a wheelchair, an individual's blind with a service animal, and a person looking off into the distance. So there's a very broad range of people with disabilities who are covered under the ADA. Next. The ADA has like a three-prong definition of who is covered. The first prong is the individual who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. The second one is have a record or history of such impairment. And the third way of being covered was being perceived by others as having an impairment. So the first one, physical and mental impairment, would cover all sorts of disabilities, individuals who are blind, individuals who are deaf, physical impairments. It also covers medical conditions, anything that has could limit one of a major life activities, such as seeing, breathing, walking, talking. There were a series of Supreme Court cases that really limited the definition under this section, but in 2008, the Congress came back and said, no, we mean this to be very broad. So the way it's currently interpreted, it also includes people with depression, individuals who might have speech impairments, someone with ADD. So really is very broad in terms of coverage. The only things it doesn't cover is maybe a broken arm or the flu, something that's very short term and that wouldn't impact major life activity. The next category has a history of an impairment, would cover someone who doesn't currently have an impairment, but has a history which could be discriminated against because of, such as oftentimes that might be a mental health history of depression or cancer or some other kind of condition or medical condition or impairment that is no longer, the individual no longer has any symptoms from. And the third category is perceived as having, which could include something like the way someone looks. It could be a scar. It could be something that actually isn't a disability or an impairment, but other people treat you or discriminate against you because they assume that it's an impairment. Next. So what I'm going to do is talk about all of the different entities that are covered under the ADA and what constitutes discrimination. And this slide just has a picture of a variety of different entities, the courts, grocery store, schools, and workplaces, all which are covered under the ADA. Next. I'm going to start with Title I, which is employment discrimination. And Title I of the ADA prohibits private employers and state and local governments, employment agencies, labor unions from discriminating against qualified individuals with disabilities. Section 504, which I quickly referenced before, also applies to employers that receive federal financial assistance. And then Section 501 of the Rehab Act applies to federal employees themselves. But the ADA gave very broad rights, very broad coverage to employers, both private and public sectors, prohibiting them from discriminating against people with disabilities, with over 15 employees. I just want to note that in California and many other states, you might also have another law which might be even more protective than the federal law. So for example, in California, our law prohibits discrimination with 5 or more employees. So you need to be familiar not only with federal law, but state law, because even this 15+ employee rule might be might not be a problem if you're in a state that provides greater protections than federal law. Next. Okay, press again. Oh, no, go, oh, sorry. Next, the next, yeah. ADA prohibits discrimination in all of the following areas. I think I need that. If you push again, I think it will make, yes. So very broad coverage. It covers you from the time you start off on your job to the time you leave your job. So the application process and procedures, including the interview process. So if there might be someone who has a visual impairment and might need to have the application materials provided in an alternative format. It includes training and recruitment opportunities and advancement and tenure reviews and opportunities, compensation, work leave and benefits, and all conditions and privileges of employment, like the workroom and the coffee shops and the retreats. So all of those are prohibited from discrimination by employers and are considered employment practices which are covered under the ADA. Next. An employee with a disability needs to be able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodations. And this is kind of the core of the protection. And you can see that there is some squiggly words in there that probably need to be interpreted. Essential functions of the job. So what the Department of Labor and what the courts look to is whether or not these are core functions of the job. Not every little thing that the employee might need to do, but the essential functions of a job need to be performed by the person with the disability in order for them to be qualified. And those essential functions could be done with or without a reasonable accommodation. If an employee with a disability doesn't need an accommodation to perform the job, then they're qualified. But if they need an accommodation and it's reasonable to perform the essential functions of the job, then the law requires that those be provided. Next. What is a reasonable accommodation? So this is probably one of the most debated topics in the law, but it's any modification or adjustment to job or work environment that will enable an applicant or an employee with a disability to participate in the application process or to perform the essential functions of the job. And I'm going to give you some examples of that so it makes it a little clearer. This also includes adjustments so that they have the rights and privileges of equal employment with their other employees. Like I said, for example, break rooms and retreats and those kinds of things as well. Any of the privileges of employment. Next. So for example, well, first of all, reasonable accommodation, because disabilities, even the same disability might not affect individuals in the same way. One person might need an accommodation, another person might be able to do the job perfectly well without one. Accommodations are determined on a case-by-case basis and are determined through what's called an interactive process with your HR department or your employer to see what kinds of flexibility, what kinds of creative solutions there are to help the individual do their job as best as they can, given their disability, and to do the essential functions of the job. So some examples of reasonable accommodations might include changing job tasks that are not essential, providing reserved parking for someone who might have a physical disability, that might have difficulties getting in and out of a building, allowing for a flexible work schedule, let's say to make an appointment for a therapy appointment once a week, changing the format or methods of testing training materials. All of those have to be accessible to employees with communication disabilities, providing accessible physical work areas for individuals who might need modifications in their work tables or accessible work spaces. Next. I'm just going to really touch on if someone had a discrimination claim, where they would go. Under Title I of the ADA, unlike Title II and III, under Title I, you would file a complaint with the federal government, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or with our California or the state agency, which in California is the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. And I provided links to those two agencies in the next slide. You have to file an administrative complaint first, but after that, employees who feel they've been discriminated against can file a complaint in court and get both injunctive relief, which is fix a policy, or get monetary relief for damages. Under employment discrimination, there are some tight timelines, so people need to act on any complaints or concerns in a timely manner. Next. Okay, so here are some really wonderful ADA employment resources, and I think I asked to highlight one of those for you so you can just see. All of them are good, all of them have different things, but I'm going to go to the Ask Jan website, which is created by the Department of Labor. And if you could pop that Ask Jan up on the wall, just gives you some sense of how extensive and wonderful some of the resources that are out there are. So if we clip down a little, it gives an overview of what the law is, basic rights. And if you scroll down a little bit more, it talks about all different aspects of employment, how you can be, what are your rights as a job applicant, what are your rights on the job. And if you flip down a little more, it talks about how you can specifically advocate with sample letters on asking for accommodations, etc. So maybe try the A to Z disabilities and accommodations. Click on that one, because I think that, oh yeah, there you go. You can do there too. Go ahead. So on this particular section of the website, you could pick a particular disability and you could click on that. Like say if you clicked on, anxiety disorder. I don't want to click on one that's too tricky here. And it specifically talks about that particular disability in the context of the workplace. It talks about employer obligations. It talks about employee obligations. And then it talks about how people can be accommodated and make suggestions on what kind of accommodations might be effective for someone who had a specific disability that might impact the workplace. And in this, it specifically talks about flexible schedule, support animal, reducing triggers, etc. So Jan is a wonderful resource for a lot of things. It also is it's free, and it provides a lot of information about people's legal rights, and really is trying to be creative and problem solving in getting employers and employees to work together to come out with accommodations that work and allow people with disabilities to be successful employees at their work site. Okay, next. Next slide. Oh, you're probably trying to get there. Okay, great. Okay, that's Title I, employment. Now I'm going to turn to Title II. Title II of the ADA requires, is called public entities. And public entities are basically state and local governments. And Title II requires that state and local governments give people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from all of their programs, services, and activities. They also can't deny people with disabilities the chance to participate or make them participate in different programs that are available. So that's the integration mandate of the ADA. Next. Now, your state and local services include a very broad range of entities that are covered. Public schools and colleges, such as all of the UC system in California, recreational parks, healthcare agencies that are, run by the state or local government, social service agencies, courts, emergency services, any place where a person goes to access services, such as renew your license, the DMV, applying for food stamp, paying your taxes, attending a town meeting, and conducting other business. So next. Under Title II, the ADA gives some specific requirements for local government. They have to communicate with people with disabilities and have effective communication that specifically is targeted toward people with, usually with people who are deaf or people with visual impairments, requirements around making those materials and information about state and local government services accessible, making reasonable modifications to rules and policies to make sure that the person can access the services, allowing service animals on site. Next. Providing program access, which means that if the building isn't physically accessible and it's not required to be because it's an older building, the programs and services be either moved or brought to the individual so that they're able to access those. So for example, it might be changing the location of a class in a college that is covered under Title II, or bringing services to the curb in a program that might not be in an accessible building. There are also specific requirements for making buildings accessible. Some of those are based on the date of the building, et cetera. They're pretty complicated. I'm not going to go into them, but specifics for altering new buildings, and then also requirements for ticket sales and testing accommodations. All of those are really laid out very specifically in the regs. Next. So I just was gonna highlight for people like what's the newest kind of topic under Title II, and it is the fact that is web access. Now, when the ADA was passed back in 1990, there wasn't really a web, so it doesn't really list in any of the examples in the statute or in the legislative history web access. And so it's been kind of a back and forth battle in the courts about to what extent web access and what standards were required. But very many years later, the Justice Department has finally come out with some draft regulations. If you want to click on that, we can look at it real quickly. Click on that site, yes. So if you're interested in a website, this is a really great fact sheet. It gives you the basics about web access, what the standards are going to be, that there's an opportunity for people to comment on those if they want to. And after this comment period, they will probably come out with regulations that govern at least Title II entities. That's what these regulations are designed to address. So, okay, next. I'm going to definitely not do the criminal justice system and emergency response justice. I did spend a fair amount of my career doing litigation around inhumane conditions in jails and around individuals who cycled in and out of psychiatric facilities not getting the adequate services that they need in the community or housing to be able to prevent them from overusing the criminal justice system. But this slide kind of shows all of the aspects of the criminal justice system that impact people with disabilities. Your fire department, your emergency response system, the police, the court system, and jail. And they all have a very large impact on people with disabilities. Next slide. All I can really do here in a very short period of time is kind of point you to two extremely good resources. The first one, let's just take a quick peek at the first one. It's the ada.gov's website on criminal justice. And if we kind of scroll down that, you'll see it gives you examples of the full range of entities that are covered under the ADA: law enforcement, courts, emergency response system, 911, arresting, booking, interviewing witnesses. All of these things are covered under the ADA. And all of the same provisions that I talked about before: obligations to make reasonable modifications, effective communication, physical access, all of those are also required of all of those entities. They give an example here of a reasonable modification of someone who is deaf. If their normal procedure were to handcuff someone behind their body, then they would with a reasonable modification might be to handcuff someone in front so they could either write notes or use sign language interpretation. Someone with an intellectual disability, they might need to actually provide their Miranda rights in a more simplified form, etc. So, there's a lot of really interesting examples and, information if people are interested specifically in this topic. Next. Okay, the last title, Title III, is public accommodations, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It's really private businesses. And Title III prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in all the activities of places of public accommodations, which are really businesses that are generally open to the public. Next. And Title III lists 12 categories of businesses, and I put them on this slide, but I'm gonna just highlight some of the ones so you know how extensive it is. Hotels, bars, restaurants, theaters, auditoriums, grocery stores, shopping centers, laundromats, beauty parlors, funeral parlors, law offices, insurance offices, healthcare professionals, museums, libraries, zoos, parks, all of the places of education that might not be covered under Title II, if it's not run by the state or local government. All of these private entities as well are covered. Social services, food banks, senior centers, health spas, gyms, bowling alleys, golf courses. Those are all covered. Next. Title III also requires that newly constructed or altered places of public accommodations comply with ADA building standards. Now, again, there's a lot of caveats and exceptions that you could drive trucks through in terms of pre-existing buildings. But when buildings are altered, restaurants have obligations to make things accessible. And newer buildings, as newer buildings are built, they have much more stringent requirements for making things accessible to people with physical disabilities. Next. This is just a slide that shows the resources that are available under Title III. I'm not going to have you click into this because we're kind of running out of time, but if you really had a private entity, this is a wonderful resource that gives you a lot of examples of discrimination and explains in more detail what the obligations of Title III entities are. Next. Okay, so I'm just going to point out this one really fabulous resource before we conclude the presentation section. We can turn to some questions and answers. But the Department of Justice, which is the U.S. government, the Department of Justice is the agency that enforces the Americans with Disabilities Act. And its website, if you want to click on that, that would be great. ADA.gov is very extensive and robust and has fabulous resources on it about all sorts of topics. And it talks about people's an overview of the law. It gives guidance and resource materials. It gives specific sections. It gives you copies of actually the law themselves and tells individuals how to file a complaint. So I'm going to ask you just to click on the topics bar at the top of this section and roll down a little. And so you can see if you're interested in any of these topics, you can pick. It has effective communication. It has access to childcare. It has criminal justice. It has mobility devices, parking, service animals, telehealth, voting. So if you click on any of those, you'll get to a website or that has more specific information about those specific topics. Go back up to the top again, the toolbar. So under the laws, regulations, and standards, look down. If you're really a geek and you're really interested in digging more deeply into what the law actually says, what the DOJ's website does is it puts the text of all the laws, the text of all the regulations. Could you just pull down that bar? Yeah, there you go. It has a copy of the ADA. It has a copy of the regulations under which are the implementing sections of the law under Title 2 and 3. It has all the design standards, which are the physical access requirements for all those entities. So it's really helpful if you want to look something up that's concrete in the law. Maybe turn to the file a complaints look down session. Okay, this is a really great page too, because it tells you if you feel like you've been discriminated against, you could go directly to court, but obviously it's free to file a complaint with the Department of Justice. It tells you, scroll down a little more. It says if you have an employment complaint, like I said before, you file with the EEOC. Air travel not covered, file with the Department of Transportation. Housing not covered, file with the Housing and Urban Development. But any other complaint under Title 2 or 3 of the ADA, that's state and local governments or any businesses, you could file a complaint with the Department of Justice. They have an online, they have a fax, they have mail-in. After you file a complaint, they have a process where they try to mediate complaints. You can choose to go through the mediation process and they try to work things out. If not, then they could investigate your complaint and issue a findings letter. So it's a really good service that people can use that's free and not you have to pay for an attorney. Okay, I think I'm done, and I think we're to questions and answers. We have a little bit of time for, yeah, we do. It looks like we have a lot of time. Next. Yeah, questions and answers. Hope I didn't go too fast.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. Those were wonderful, informative things to talk about. And we do have a few questions, and I'm not sure if you can see them. And then I can see that they're all kind of related to digital and virtual. So if you don't mind helping us answer the 3 questions.
Sure. I'm trying to, am I seeing them here?
I can also read that off for you.
Are they in the Q&A? Oh, no, we don't have any in there. Yeah,
it should
have to read them to me because I don't see
Sure.
them.
Sure. Okay. So the first question we have is, in the context of digital accessibility, what are some common challenges that businesses face in meeting ADA requirements? And what strategies do you recommend for mitigating these challenges?
So if you're talking about websites that are actually well, I'm gonna start by saying I'm definitely not a web access expert, so I kind of know the basics, but I would point you back to some of the web materials that I referred to. But there are different standards probably for Title II and Title III entities. So there was a lot of litigation about whether or not a store was brick and mortar, or whether their website was simply just an extension of their brick and mortar. And whether they were even covered under the ADA, because as like I said before, the web wasn't mentioned. The ADA preceded the web. So what the federal government, the DOJ regulations that I just spoke about, really are targeted toward coming up with very precise standards for accessibility, for screen readers, for the way you can manipulate through the website, so that I think it's mostly people with visual impairments can actually access the information on the website, and that the text is accessible to screen readers, and that also the pictures themselves are described in such a way so that they're accessible to people who are need to read screens as well. So those precise standards, I think they're called Web 2. If you go back to my website screen, it specifically lists what the standards are. If someone has, when you're getting to more like businesses, et cetera, there's been a fair amount of litigation around web access, and there have been a fair amount of lawsuits around things like touchscreens and other kinds of technology that are really challenging for people with certain kinds of disabilities. And also in the area of voting, that voting machines are accessible. So there's really a lot of interface between the latest technology, the best practices, and kind of what is available in the market to assist people with sensory disabilities or communication disabilities and let them access all of the kind of technology that's often used in businesses and in, you know, state and local governments and on the web. So I don't know if that answers it, but I think I would, you know, I recommend if there's a specific question to try looking at a couple of those resources and see if those are answered in that guidance put out by the DOJ.
Thank you. And I think there was just one added on question for
Okay.
this one. What about for people who are blind?
So I think that a lot of the access standards are specifically address visual impairments and blindness in access, because that's probably the area you can kind of see, you can see that that's the area where there would be the most issues, because when you click on a screen, obviously you can't see it, so you need to have a way to go through all of those layers of subtabs and menus, etc., that would be clear to someone who used a screen reader. And I think that I don't know if I think you have people on this team with visual impairments. They probably could answer this question better than I could. But I think this is exactly what they're trying to address in some of the new regulations and some of the lawsuits that have been brought, particularly in the area of like education, students who are blind, not being able to get on online classes, not being able to access the materials, all sorts of things. So need to be able to have alternative formats, either stuff that can be read with a screen reader, that are taped, talking, etc. So you have an alternative format that people can access. Does that make sense? And I'd be happy to cede the floor to anybody who might know more from personal experience than I do. Okay.
Cindy, you're muted.
Oh yeah, I think Victor just sent the new guidance standards.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll kind of move on, but please do add your comments and feedbacks on the chat and we can all see it. So the next question, Kim, can you provide examples of recent ADA-related legal cases or settlements that have significant implications for businesses, especially in the digital realm, and what lessons can be learned from the cases?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna punt. I really am not probably an expert in web access. So as I said before, there are cases around coverage, whether or not websites are coverage. There are cases around what standards those websites have to adhere to, whether it's the latest accessibility guideline standards. There is an attorney in the Bay Area, Lady Feingold, who is someone who does a tremendous amount of litigation in this area. And if I could find her website, I could probably pop it in she does a really good job of covering this particular, kind of issue under the ADA. So maybe I could find that for you before we pop offline. Or maybe my technical person could find Lainey Feingold Law.
Hi, this is Victor. I just posted the link in the chat, I think.
There, she does a great job of kind of talking about the latest accessibility standards and has a lot of, I think, information about her litigation, which the other place I think to find out about cases would be would definitely also be the Department of Justice. If we go back to that website, I'm sure if you Googled website access in there, they would have, I think they've done some settlements with Harvard and some of the bigger colleges and schools for their online learning programs and their websites. So I'm gonna guess that there's a treasure trove of information in there as well.
Okay, thank you. And I know there is a third question in
Somebody
regards
asked
to.
a question about UNRU and service animals. And I just want to say, UNRU is our state law in California, so not going to spend too much time on it, but like I said before, state laws and UNRU and California have much more protective laws, not much more, but more protective laws than maybe the federal laws. So it is important to be familiar with your state laws. I think that the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing is coming out with brand new regulations any day now. So in maybe the 6th slide or something, I gave you the website jump for the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. And on that website, they would probably have information about UNRU and about state law and about state regulations and about the more protective issues around probably service animals and housing and some of the other issues that might not have as that might not be covered as well under federal law. So do you know where that slide was back? I think it was, I don't know what number slide it was. I don't have that handy. But where they ask yeah. Are you trying to find it or should I just not? It's going to be the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. Okay, here, go back. Yep, the next one. Next one. It's on the same one as the Jan's page. Yep, there. The bottom one, it goes calcivilrights.gov. So check that out. That's going to have our state, much more information about our state laws and the whole issues of support and service animals and employment versus housing.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And I just want to go back to the third question. I know it's also an online question, so
Yeah.
I think Kim probably pretty much covered and answered that question. I just don't want to dismiss any question that we are seeing. And then the next one, Kim, if we want to file complaint about the physical accessibility of a state or city public space, such as a botanic garden, who should that complaint be made to?
It's actually good. That's a really good question, because if it's a state or local government, you probably should start with someone like their ADA, start low and work your way up. So oftentimes public entities have what's called, and they're required to have an ADA coordinator embedded in their agency. So I might start off by their website and see if you can locate their ADA coordinator and start there with a grievance or a complaint. And if you don't get the kind of response that you want, then you can kind of move up the food chain. So I would start particularly with local governments or public, kind of public entities. See if there's not someone within their group that might be helpful. So like there might be an ADA coordinator for the city or the county. There might be an ADA coordinator for, any of those public entities. It might be a place to start, and they might be your true ally because they might want to really see things fixed. From then, if you don't get the results you want, like I said before, the place you go for Title II and III entities is the Department of Justice. And we did pop on that website briefly and look at the complaint process. So that's where I would go next. Maybe if we go back to the slide that had, just wish I had the number of the slide. There's a slide with 4 different kind of resources that it has the ADA coordinators information on them. So there's a website that specifically talks about ADA coordinators and regional coordinators in your area, which is another resource as well. Yeah, but I mean, schools also too often have ADA coordinators. Like all the community colleges and the state colleges should all have someone assigned with the responsibility of trying to work out ADA questions and problems.
Okay. And then the next one, a common generic one is, what is the relationship between the Fair Employment and Housing Act and the ADA?
Okay, so the Fair Employment and Housing Act is a state law, and the ADA is a federal law. Both of them cover employment discrimination, but like I said before, the ADA, I talked to you about the basic provisions and the fact that it covers employers of 15 plus. Our state law, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, covers employers of 5 plus. So you have some better protections there in terms of size of employer. There are probably also other features under the state law, and I gave you that website too. You could pop on and see. It might talk more specifically about the kind of accommodations people can get. There just might be some other protections in there that might be more protective than our federal law. So it's always good to know the state law as well as the federal law. The one other thing is that I talked about filing with the EEOC. In California, there's a work share agreement where all employment complaints, even under the ADA, go directly to the Fair Employment and Housing department first. So even if you filed with the EEOC, unless you were, worked for a federal agency or something, they would probably push that complaint off to the state entity first. So starting with the state entity is not a bad thing to do in the area of employment.
Okay, thank you. So we have actually a couple more minutes if we have any more questions or comments. But Kim, I actually have one, and mine's kind of, so I do know that you kind of referencing back to when you talk about public space, if they were to remodel it, or if it's new buildings, they are required to, for example, provide elevators, right? So my concern is, what about the old buildings? I have a lot of issues accessing stores when they're second floor, even just a couple of steps. It's very, very difficult for me. What would some of your recommendation or suggestions be when I encounter that?
Yeah, I mean, if you know that the building isn't required to be accessible, then what they have to do is they have to provide their services in a readily achievable manner. So oftentimes a store might bring products to a more accessible location within the store. They might have to provide you with other opportunities to view merchandise, etc. So it isn't a perfect, and the ADA and disability rights law has a lot of compromises built into it, and physical access is one of those. So it's helpful to just be familiar with, like, you have to find out whether what was the date the building was built, and whether there were modifications made. And then from then on, then you're really looking at what are the services that they provide, and can those services be offered in an accessible manner? So those are kind of the steps. And it does make a difference if it's a Title II entity or a Title III entity, because businesses have less onerous requirements than a Title II entity, which is pretty much required to provide access. So they might be required to move their office location or to relocate a class or those kinds of things. If you're a public entity, for sure.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions, concerns, comments? Kim, I just really want to thank you. I've learned so much, and we're hoping you will come back. And let's see. Do we have anything? Oh, okay. So Victor did post some employment resources. Yeah, so I want to close this webinar out if we don't have anything else. Kim, is there something, let's say somebody else have any questions after the webinar, can they reach you in any way? Can they reach out to me? Maybe I could forward that to you. How would you like to be contacted if you're open to that?
Well, if it's general questions, happy to answer those. And they could go through you, that would be great. If someone has a personal problem, a personal legal question, I would just urge them to kind of access some of these other resources. I still have my bar card, but I don't have malpractice insurance. So I'm probably not going to give people advice about their individual questions or specific problems, but general questions I'd be happy to answer for the council. Happy to come to one of your meetings and do follow up or whatever you need.
Great, thank you so much. And Victor, if you don't mind posting our email again, just for those that would like to reach out to connect or have any additional questions after the webinar. Let's see. So we do have about 3 minutes. So there is a comment when I had done an interview and in an old building, my interviewers conducted my interview in the floor that I was already in, not the meeting room, which was not accessible. That's great to know. And I think a lot of times we don't know that is possible. So thank you so much for sharing. Anything else, anyone? All righty, thank you again. And then again, our email is posted. If you need any other support resources, please join us. We do have a meeting every month. Bring your questions. If you need any support, any help, we're here. We have a lot of members that are very, very supportive and resourceful. Thank you so much again, Kim.
Thank you. It was great to meet all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you. That's amazing.